There's a moment you've probably had before. Maybe it was late at night lying in bed when the world went quiet enough for you to actually hear yourself think. Or maybe it was in the middle of something ordinary, washing dishes, walking alone, watching rain hit a window. And out of nowhere, this feeling arrived. A feeling that you, whatever you really are somehow more than this body, more than this name, more than the job, the worries, the daily routine that fills up most of your hours. You couldn't explain it. You probably didn't try to. But the feeling was real. More real in some ways than anything else you've ever felt. What if that feeling wasn't imagination? What if it was your deepest intelligence, the part of you that operates below thought, below language, below everything you were taught, trying to show you something true? Here's what's remarkable. One of the most decorated scientists alive on this planet spent decades building a scientific case for exactly that feeling. Not a spiritual teacher, not a philosopher. A Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Oxford University named Roger Penrose, the man who proved mathematically that black holes exist, the colleague of Stephen Hawking, looked at the science of consciousness and reached a conclusion that most of his peers were not ready to hear. Your mind is not something your brain produces. Your brain is something your mind uses. That one shift, from producer to receiver, changes everything. It changes what you are. It changes what you're capable of. It changes what happens when you go to sleep, when you meditate, when you have a feeling you can't explain, when you think of someone right before they call. It changes the story you've been living inside. And in the next 30 minutes, we're going to walk through exactly why a Nobel Prize winner came to that conclusion. And more importantly, what it means for your life right now, today, in the way you see yourself and the world around you. Stay with this, because by the end, something is going to feel different. Not because we convinced you of anything, but because some part of you already knew. Let's start with something personal. Think about the last time you walked into a room and immediately felt that something was wrong, before anyone said a word, before any obvious sign. You just knew. The air felt different. Something in you registered it before your mind had time to process it. Or think about a time you thought of someone you hadn't spoken to in months, and hours later, they reached out. Or a moment when a decision felt wrong in your gut, even though every logical reason said it was right. And you followed logic. And it went wrong exactly the way your gut said it would. Where did that knowing come from? Science has a name for it, intuition, but no real explanation for how it works. And that gap, that silence where an explanation should be, is actually the most important clue in this entire story. Here's what mainstream science will tell you about who you are. You are your brain. Your thoughts, your feelings, your sense of self. All of it is produced by electrical signals firing between neurons. 100 billion of them connected by 100 trillion pathways, generating the experience of being you, the same way a power plant generates electricity. Input goes in. Processing happens. Output comes out. By that model, you are, at your core, a very sophisticated machine. And here is what that model cannot explain, has never explained despite over a century of trying. Why does it feel like anything at all? A computer processes information, but it doesn't feel the weight of a decision. It doesn't experience the ache of missing someone. It doesn't wake up at 3 in the morning with a feeling it can't name. It doesn't have an inner world. You do. And no equation, no brain scan, no amount of mapping neurons has ever explained where that inner world comes from. Philosopher David Chalmers gave this the name it deserved: the hard problem of consciousness. Hard not because it's complicated. Hard because every tool classical science has ever built has failed to touch it. The machine can be mapped completely, but the ghost inside the machine remains unexplained. Roger Penrose looked at this problem not as a philosopher, but as a physicist. And he asked a question that changed everything. What if the reason we can't explain consciousness using classical science is because consciousness doesn't operate by classical rules? What if your awareness, that intimate, irreducible sense of being you, belongs to a layer of reality that physics is only now beginning to understand? A layer where the rules we learned in school don't apply, where something can be in 2 places at once, where the act of observing something changes what it is, where connection across distance is not just possible, it has been proven in a laboratory. You already live there. You always have. You just didn't have the language for it yet. Now here is where the story gets remarkable. Roger Penrose didn't arrive at his conclusions through meditation or mystical experience. He arrived there through mathematics, through the same rigorous, unforgiving logic that he used to prove the existence of black holes. And what the math kept telling him, over and over, across decades of work, was that human consciousness could not be what mainstream science claimed it was. Here's why. The dominant theory of mind says the brain works like a computer. It takes in information, processes it according to fixed rules, and produces an output. Logical, mechanical, predictable. But Penrose noticed something that this model could never account for. Human beings can perceive truth in ways that no algorithm can replicate. There are mathematical truths, proven, verified truths, that no computer program, no matter how sophisticated, can ever reach by following rules alone. Yet a human mind can feel them, can recognize them, can arrive at understanding through something that isn't logic, something closer to direct perception. Penrose called this insight. And he argued that insight, real insight, the kind that changes you, the kind that arrives in a flash and rearranges everything you thought you knew, cannot come from a machine following instructions. It has to come from somewhere else. That somewhere else led him deep into quantum physics. And there, at the smallest scale of physical reality, he found something that felt like an answer. Inside every cell of your body, including every one of the 100 billion neurons in your brain, there are tiny structures called microtubules. For a long time, science thought of them as nothing more than the skeleton of the cell. Structural support, biological scaffolding. But Penrose, working with neuroscientist Stuart Hameroff, proposed something extraordinary. These microtubules, he argued, are not just structural. They are quantum processors. They hold open a state that physicists call superposition, a condition where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously, unresolved, like a question the universe is still holding in its hands. And here is the part that will stay with you. That moment when the question resolves, when the superposition collapses into a single definite state, Penrose and Hameroff proposed that this is the moment of conscious experience. Not neurons firing, not chemistry happening, but the universe itself, at its most fundamental level, making a choice. And that choice happening inside you, billions of times every second, is what you experience as awareness, as thought, as presence, as the undeniable sense that you are here, and that being here means something. You are not a machine that woke up by accident. You are a place where the universe becomes aware of itself. That is not a metaphor. That is the scientific theory of a Nobel Prize winner. And what happened next, when scientists tried to prove it wrong, is the part that changes everything. When Penrose and Hameroff published their theory, the reaction from the scientific community was immediate. It's impossible, they said. Their argument was simple. Quantum processes are extraordinarily delicate. They require conditions close to absolute zero temperature to function, environments so cold and controlled that they barely exist outside a laboratory. The brain, they argued, is warm and wet and chaotic. Life is messy. And quantum coherence, in that fragile state of open possibility, could never survive inside something as noisy as a living cell. It was a reasonable objection for about 15 years. Then in 2007, a physicist named Gregory Engel published a study in Nature, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. His team was studying something that seemed completely unrelated to consciousness. They were studying photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into energy. And deep inside the living molecules responsible for this process, warm, wet, messy biological tissue, they found quantum coherence. Not in a laboratory cooled to near absolute zero, in a living system, at room temperature. The argument that life was too warm for quantum processes didn't weaken. It fell apart completely. And then Stuart Hameroff, who had spent decades as an anesthesiologist watching people lose and regain consciousness, brought forward an observation so precise it is almost impossible to dismiss. Think about what anesthesia actually does. When you go under general anesthesia, your brain does not shut down. Your neurons keep firing. Your synapses keep working. Your heart beats. Your lungs breathe. Every biological function continues. The machine is fully running. But you, the awareness, the presence, the inner world, are simply gone. Not dimmed, not slowed. Gone. Now ask yourself, if consciousness were just the product of neurons firing, how could you remove it completely while leaving the neurons intact? You cannot remove the light from a room while leaving the light bulb on and connected to power, unless the light bulb isn't the source of the light. Hameroff's research showed that anesthetic molecules act specifically on the microtubules inside neurons. They don't shut down the brain. They interrupt the quantum process. They silence the receiver. And when the receiver goes quiet, the experience of being you disappears entirely. This is what the science is pointing to. Not that you have consciousness, but that you are consciousness, temporarily, beautifully, mysteriously focused through a physical form. Every moment of clarity you have ever felt, every inexplicable knowing, every time the answer arrived before the question was fully formed, every time you felt connected to something larger than your own story. That was not imagination. That was the universe, the same quantum reality that holds stars and space and time together, moving through the receiver that is you. Right now, before we go any further, drop this in the comments. I am not my brain. I am what flows through it. Just that line. I want to see how many of us are feeling this together. Let's bring this closer, because everything we've explored so far, the Nobel Prize winner, the quantum theory, the experiments that broke the old model, none of it matters if it stays in the abstract, if it stays intellectual, if it remains a fascinating idea you heard once in a video and filed away somewhere between things you mean to think about later. This is not meant to be filed away. This is meant to land in your body, in your life, in the way you walk through your day tomorrow morning. So let's talk about what this actually means for you. If your consciousness is not produced by your brain, if your awareness is something the universe is expressing through you rather than something your biology invented, then you are not what you were taught you were. You were taught, in 1,000 subtle ways, that you are a small thing, that your thoughts are just chemistry, that your feelings are just hormones, that your intuitions are just pattern recognition dressed up as mysticism, that the sense you sometimes have of being connected to something larger than yourself is a comforting illusion your brain generates to help you cope. You were handed a story about yourself that made you smaller than you are. And that story has consequences. Because if you believe you are only a brain, only a machine processing inputs and producing outputs, then your inner life becomes unreliable. Your intuitions become suspicious. Your deepest knowings become things to be second-guessed and overridden by logic. Your sense of connection to other people, to nature, to something larger than your own name, becomes something to be embarrassed by. But what if the story was wrong from the beginning? Think about the people throughout history who changed everything, who saw what others couldn't see, who knew things before there was evidence to know them, who followed an inner certainty that everyone around them called foolish until it turned out to be genius. Einstein said his greatest discoveries came not from calculation, but from imagination and feeling, from asking himself what it would feel like to ride alongside a beam of light, from a quality of inner knowing that preceded all the mathematics that followed. Edison said he never invented anything. He said he discovered things that already existed, as if he were a receiver tuning into a signal that was always there, waiting for someone still enough to hear it. Nikola Tesla described his ideas arriving fully formed, not built piece by piece through logic, but received, whole, complete, as if handed to him from somewhere beyond the boundary of his own mind. Were these men making metaphors? Or were they describing, in the language available to them, exactly what Roger Penrose would spend his life proving in equations? That the mind reaches beyond the brain. That awareness is not local, that you are not sealed inside your skull, isolated and alone, generating your experience from scratch every morning. You are connected, at the quantum level, at the most fundamental layer of what reality actually is, to something vastly larger than your personal history. And this connection is not passive, it is not decorative. It is the mechanism by which insight arrives. by which healing happens in ways medicine cannot fully explain, by which two people who love each other deeply can feel each other's pain across a distance, by which you sometimes know, with a certainty that bypasses all rational justification, exactly what you need to do next. The physicist Alain Aspect won the Nobel Prize in 2022 for proving something that Einstein called impossible: that two particles, once connected, remain connected regardless of the distance between them. Change one, and the other responds. Instantly. Not almost instantly. Instantly. Faster than light. Across any distance. Scientists call this quantum entanglement. You might call it something else. The feeling that someone you love is in trouble before the phone rings. The sense of being held by something larger than circumstance when everything around you is falling apart. The inexplicable pull toward a place, a person, a path that turned out to be exactly right. These are not coincidences. They are not the brain misfiring. They are you, a conscious being whose awareness operates at the quantum level, experiencing the reality that physics has now confirmed. You are not separate from the universe observing it from outside. You are the universe, awake inside itself, looking out through your eyes. And that changes something fundamental about how you move through your life. It means your inner life is not noise to be managed. It is signal to be followed. It means the quiet knowing that arrives in moments of stillness is not less reliable than rational thought. In many cases, it is more. It means the connection you feel to others is not just emotional,